Hello from Gardening at Dwensa here in Ireland. Now, I've been growing Cymbidiums for quite a few years, and somebody asked me to make a Cymbidium care guide. So that's what this video is all about. It's how I grow Cymbidiums, everything about them, also moving plants indoors to enjoy their flowers in the warmth. I've come out to the greenhouse today to show you my Cymbidiums and just to give you a little background about them before we start. Now, as you can see, Cymbidiums are wonderful large flowered orchids, and they first came into popularity with the Victorians. They were perfectly suited to the Victorians' houses because the Victorians had large windows and very cool temperatures. And I guess that's been the downfall of the Cymbidium in modern times, because we all live in heated houses now, and that makes reflowering them just that bit more tricky. But Cymbidiums are semi-terrestrial orchids, and with a few simple tricks, there should be no reason why you can't get them into flower again. A common complaint with Cymbidiums is that they grow really vigorously but never reflower. And that's down to two things: insufficient light and too warm temperatures. So Cymbidiums need good light, and that's why I have mine out here in the greenhouse, because they do have the best of light. But you can also give them good light on a good south-facing window in the house. And another trick to get them that light is to bring them outdoors in summer. Put them in a sheltered spot outdoors for the whole of the summer, from June to September. And we'll come back to that in a minute when I talk in a bit more detail about the temperature requirements. Cymbidiums are cool growing orchids, and that means that in summer they need a maximum of 30 degrees centigrade. It means that the greenhouse is too hot for them then, so you need to be putting these plants outdoors in a sheltered position where they're not going to get too much rain, and they need a minimum of 10 degrees. Or so most books will have you believe, but actually, 5 degrees minimum is grand for Cymbidiums. But that's not the whole story. What they really need is a temperature difference between day and night in late summer to make them reflower, and that's where we all come unstuck. I had a conversation a few years ago with a friend of mine who had underfloor heating in her house that just couldn't be switched off, and she was trying to reflower Cymbidiums, and there's just no way. In certain situations there is no way you can reflower Cymbidiums, but for most of us who aren't that limited, we can certainly do it. So by putting your Cymbidiums outdoors during the summer, especially in late summer when those buds are forming, you're making sure that they get the temperature difference between day and night, well, in this part of the world anyway. And some people say that the difference needs to be as much as 10 degrees, but with the modern hybrids that we grow, I don't think it's as much as that at all. In September, I moved my Cymbidiums from the garden back into the greenhouse, just as it's getting a bit cold. And that serves me well, but not everybody has a greenhouse. And if you don't have a greenhouse, what you need to do at that stage is to move your Cymbidium indoors. If you have a cool room where the radiator doesn't get switched on, well, that's the room for your Cymbidium, providing it has some good light. But failing that, then just choose the coolest room you can with the maximum of light, and they should be okay. They should reflower. For several years, that's what I did. I didn't use the greenhouse at all for the Cymbidiums. I just moved them into the house, and they did flower for me. So I know it can be done, and if I can do it, you can do it. So, do give it a go. And especially look out for the mini Cymbidiums, because they take up so much less space than the big, meaty ones. Right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is watering Cymbidiums. And I guess the hint here is that they're semi-terrestrial, so they need a good bit of water. You need to water all year, but easing off in winter, especially if your Cymbidium is kept at the low temperature of 5 degrees that mine is in the greenhouse. And when watering Cymbidiums in winter, be very careful not to splash those emerging flower spikes. If you get water on them and the temperatures are cold, then they may well rot, and my goodness, we certainly don't want that. And what about feeding these beauties, you may ask? And look at them, they're big and they're meaty, aren't they? What I actually feed my Cymbidiums with is half-strength ordinary plant liquid fertiliser, and I do that in spring and summer. But my trick is that in October and November I switch to full strength tomato food at every watering. In spring and summer I feed them just once a month, but in October and November I feed them once a week at full strength. And that brings me on to repotting, because these are big, vigorous plants, and very soon the roots and the pseudobulbs have filled up the pots and you need to be considering potting them on. Repotting is best done in spring, and they're just a little bit different from ordinary orchids. Now, in terms of potting mix, you can just use bark, but I like to use the orchid bark that they sell in supermarkets here in Ireland at least. And it's a very bad orchid bark. It's got a lot of peat in it. It's not fit for purpose now. I wouldn't use it for ordinary orchids, but I do use it for the Cymbidiums because, well, they are semi-terrestrial, so that bit of peat will do them well. So to repot the orchid, you need to take it out of its pot, obviously, and you're going to find a mass of roots in there, and cut off any dead roots that you can. But what you're also going to need to do is to reduce the number of roots. Cut off some of the healthy white roots, a couple of inches at the bottom, and that'll spur the plant into regrowth and help it to, well, to make fresh new roots. And when you're repotting, remember that you need at least 5 pseudobulbs in your plant if you want it to reflower the following year. If you're dividing the plant, it's grand if you take off divisions of 3 pseudobulbs, but they're not going to flower for 2 to 3 years after that. So providing that you're happy with that, then, well, that's what you're going to do. The final thing I want to talk to you about today is moving Cymbidiums from a cold environment into a warmer one. And this is something I did for several years, because I grew my Cymbidiums in the greenhouse, got them to flower in the greenhouse, but then I wanted to enjoy the flowers indoors. And it is tricky. So there are a couple of things to bear in mind and a couple of stages where treatment is different. Now, do remember, if you move your Cymbidiums into a warmer environment, the flowers are going to last less long. They'll last for a long time in a nice cool place, but it's up to you whether, you have to weigh up the enjoyment gotten from viewing your Cymbidiums in the kitchen compared to having them for a very long time in a faraway place where you're going to see them less often. The first Cymbidium we're going to consider for moving into the house is this one here. And if we look in at it, we can see that the flower spikes are coming. Here's one here down below. And it's not very far advanced. Now, there is no danger at this stage of moving this into the house. It can be done. But if we look further around this plant, the situation is a lot less clear. And here we have another spike on the same plant, and you can see that the buds are just emerging. Now, as those buds have started to emerge in this cold environment, if you move this into a warmer environment, it's going to blast, or it's very likely going to blast. Never say never. There's no 100% with these guides, but it's very likely to blast. So I've missed the window of opportunity for moving this into the house. I need to wait. Here's another flower spike just a little bit further along, and again it's not started to open. This should not be moved, otherwise it will definitely blast. And finally we have this large Cymbidium here where the flowers are opened. Now, I could move this into the house, but what I would have to do first is to check that every single flower on every single spike is open. Because if one of them is not open, those ones are open, this one here is open, and these are almost fully open down here. So all of the flowers are open on this one. It's a good candidate for moving. If there had been a bud on here that wasn't open, then it would likely blast with the warmer temperatures. So that's my guide on how to move Cymbidiums into the house if you've managed to flower them or get them to spike somewhere else. And just bear in mind that in real life, there's no 100% guarantee. So all I can say is that this is the advice I was originally given several years ago, and I did try it for a couple of years and it worked well for me. And in this month's Irish Garden magazine, for which I write, here we go, so the Irish Garden magazine, I have on my greenhouse gardening page a section which deals with Cymbidiums and specifically with moving them into the house in this kind of situation that we've just dealt with. But you know what? You got more information here in this video than was in the original magazine. And that brings me to the end of my guide on Cymbidium care, how to reflower them, how to grow them, and also how to move your flowering plant into the warmth of the house without suffering bud blast. Thanks very much for watching, and that's all for now. Bye!